100% commerce industry focused, but I'm also focusing on general F&O stuff and Power Platform stuff. So let's dive in. First of all, a little bit about myself, but I will keep it short because we have a lot to cover. I have a, let's say, 20 years background in supply chain and commerce so far. Next year, that's kind of my anniversary. Also my 15-year anniversary in the Dynamics ecosystem. I consider myself 45% functional, 55% technical. I try to still combine these two dimensions, right? And also the commerce business dimension. I've had the privilege to work for many nice brands over the last years on international projects. Not only focusing on finance operations or CE, functional technical side, but especially also on Azure integrations. So doing stuff with Service Bus, Azure API management, Event Grid, those tools. And on the other hand, also the low-code, no-code tools, right? Like the Power Automate stuff, a little bit of Power BI, and also a little bit of Power Apps. So yeah, I consider myself a true enterprise architect on the Dynamics ecosystem. Very exciting system, of course, and we will, cover a lot of that technology today. Not the AI side like Aurelian was doing, but more like the integration side. Let's see. I also recently started my own small company. It's not a real company. It's more like a collaboration with people in India and people in Eastern Europe, to basically, focus on the combination of Dynamics and Azure integrations, because I see that there's a big demand there and also a lot of knowledge and things to share. And that's also what the focus is of today, basically. So it all comes together. What do I have? Before we start, actually, this is a level 300 session. So it's difficult also to wrap this topic in 15 minutes, but I will try to do that and also have some time left for Q&A. The introduction will be a little bit more difficult for people who are not on that level, but I will make that short, and then some demos. I will make them understandable for non-techies. We may have a post-COVID QR code trauma, but I would like to ask you to have your QR code scanner ready on your phone, because we will do a demo later utilizing that scanner. So please have it ready. Then let's have a look what we are going to cover today. So first of all, I'm gonna try to define the challenge that we are facing in the commerce space when it comes to integrations. And then we'll basically start to define a resolution to cover that challenge. And the idea is to build a Power Platform connector for Dynamics Commerce. So you can basically utilize the Dynamics APIs in a low-code fashion. So a couple of demos, and then to conclude, I will give you some resources so you can do some further digging and further understanding of this context. And then a question to the community whether we may start a GitHub library, basically building out that connector as a community. The technology that we will cover today is we will do something with Microsoft Forms. And just we will use it as an application, basically, or taking the place of an application. We'll do something with Power Automate with the connector that I will show. API management, Azure API management. Which is basically used as the facade layer to connect to Dynamics Commerce. So we'll combine all of that in the demos today. This is about 20 minutes, first piece, 25 for the next, but I hope to keep the first part as short as possible, and then we'll finish up, hopefully 15 minutes. So I'll keep an eye on the time. First of all, if you look at finance operations integrations, most of you will be familiar with that in the audience. Then, of course, we have our data sitting on this core SaaS product. We have our business logic wrapping around it, right, which is basically our X++ code. And then we have our OData layer or our DIXF framework, both for for low volume or high volume data exposure. If you look at the partners in the commerce space, then most partners, they will try to connect to that OData layer or the DXF layer directly when we talk about e-commerce platforms, POS system, third-party sales channels, right? Sales channels are very important in the Dynamics commerce industry. Obviously, it's about e-com platforms, about point of sale in-store systems. It's about apps in store, used for receiving goods, dispatching goods. It's also used for marketplace integration, as well as customer service. But all these third-party systems, they're usually connected via this generic backend layer. I roughly said, I would say it's about 90-95% of the market. That is a problem, because most of the times these partners are connecting to generic data entities, or they build custom services, which often go around the omni-channel logic, the omni-channel capability, which is baked into the commerce offering, right? So if you load data into Dynamics, you're not compatible with those omni-channel capabilities, then it's very difficult to build an omni-channel scenario, right? To support that type of scenario. For that purpose, Microsoft actually put Headless Commerce into place, right? Which is part of the Dynamics Commerce offering. It's basically a separate SaaS solution, right? It's the cloud scale unit, as they call it. So it's also meant to be scaled. And it basically has the same structure, this cloud scale unit, with its services on it. Same structure as the backend side, right? So we have our data layer, that scale unit has its own database. We have our business logic, which is coded in C#. And then we have an OData layer exposing those services to the outside world. So we'll have a deeper look soon. Most of you will be familiar with that, but a good understanding of this architecture is important for the rest of the story. This is also where the native channel, so the native Dynamics POS and the native e-com channel, which is now, I think like 2 years old, are connected to, right? So any communication, between the point of sale and the scale unit is going through OData. Same for e-commerce. Of course, e-commerce can also expose different data sources. So not only connecting to this cloud scale unit, but it's important to understand how they connect, right? Because if you understand that, then you will no longer connect your e-com or POS platform to the backend side. Then you will actually use the scale unit for connectivity. And if you do that in the way the native applications are connecting, then you're actually compatible with the omni-channel scenarios, like sell online, pick up in store, return in store, right? Those scenarios. Basically two components allow traffic to that scale unit. One is the real-time service, which is basically still a SOAP XML-based endpoint on the backend. So some flows between the sales channels and the backend go through a real-time interface, fetching data and then returning that data to the client. Other data is actually synced in bulk, right? Because you can imagine if you load millions of transactions on a monthly basis, then it's important to have a bulk mechanism, right, which is suitable for that type of interaction. So then the sales channels store their data locally on the scale unit, and we bulk sync it to the backend. If you look at the Commerce API sitting on that scale unit, it's already a bunch of APIs. This was as per version 10.06, so it's quite a long time ago. We already had like 400 APIs sitting on there, and it's growing and growing, especially now with the new e-com platform. If you look at the use of those APIs and their value, most of the Dynamics F&O backend OData services, right, they are 98% real data services. So that they're used to update data, they're used to create data, they're used to read data, right? But they're not really packed with a lot of business logic. Of course, you can expose OData actions, and then it's closer to being a real service, but that's maybe 2% out of the full stack of all these services. On the commerce side, it's a little bit different, because half of the services are actually, packed with business logic. And so if we take a look very shortly at the architecture, the clients, they connect to that scale unit, and basically it is a collection of microservices internally, right? On the one hand, there are services which connect to the local database, and on the other hand, there are services connecting to the Dynamics backend, right? In a request response pattern. They are called remote data services. Often these flows can be parameterized, right? So in the backend, the parameter settings, or by flight keys, you can actually point these services to look at local data or write local data as opposed to real-time connectivity. So you can also balance traffic in that sense as per your scenario. So what do I mean by services packed with business logic? One example, if you search for a customer on via the Commerce APIs, then really deep down you will see that a stored procedure called crt.get customer search results, and we are now on v4, is used. If you look at that stored procedure in a dev box, for example, you will see that there's a lot of rules, basically business rules, sitting there trying to find those customers for you. So based on loyalty card information, based on address information, there's a lot of tables looped in there. And the same is when you do the same search, not via the local opportunity, but via the global opportunity. And global means we pass a parameter. So the customer search is actually going against the backend in real time. So you can also do, for example, a cross-company search. And this is very interesting because if you have cross-company sales channels like stores in multiple countries, then actually on the backend side, Dynamics will perform a search for that customer record via the party. And if the party is found, then automatically a customer will be created when that customer is selected, right? It will be created in the respective legal entity. So that there's a lot of business logic backing these services, and that makes these Dynamics endpoints, these Dynamics Commerce endpoints, so valuable. Then if you look at the purpose, right? So yes, we have a lot of services. Yes, they have a lot of business logic, but what are the use cases to actually use them? In my opinion, there are three use cases. The first one is to kind of come to an omni-channel experience. So if you're working on a commerce customer, right, then often they have an e-com platform, a POS system, marketplaces like Amazon. They could all connect via the scale unit and then into Dynamics. This connectivity, that is where we leverage these APIs. So that's our first kind of business scenario where we would leverage a connector. The second one are third-party apps, right? So I'm not talking about apps that we build in in the model-driven space on the Power Platform or in Power Apps. I'm talking about apps, third-party apps, which want to want access or want to write something via the scale unit or directly into Dynamics, connecting to our ERP world or our commerce world. So that's the second scenario where a connector might be very useful because often it's difficult to get them connected. And I will tell you later why. And then the Power Platform, of course, our low-code, no-code area. We would love to have a Power Automate based connector for the scale unit, right? We have one for finance and operations. We don't have one currently, although there are some signals that Microsoft are working on it. I will show that later as well. But it would be helpful to bring that into the low-code, no-code space as well. So we can leverage these 400 or more APIs directly out of the box without any coding or whatsoever. So three purposes. What I'm going to show today is that our solution that I have tried to define in the next section will help all the three areas. So it's not only helping the scale unit or the commerce side, it will also help your Dynamics Finance integrations, so the backend integrations. So if we look across, and this is very, very schematic, right? If we look across the integration capabilities from Dynamics backend and the commerce side, then there are three categories where we would like to have that out-of-box connectivity. One is programmatic integration. By programmatic integration, I mean you have like a C# client who you want to link up with Dynamics Finance Operations, leveraging these OData-based APIs, or you want to leverage the Commerce APIs. Microsoft have always been very active, generate or actually publishing functionality to the market to simplify that integration. So for finance operations, you can use the OData v4 client generator to generate the proxy client libraries, and then it's fairly easy to connect. For the commerce area, they have provided a C# and TypeScript proxy, also relatively simple to connect to the Commerce APIs. But it becomes more difficult to connect when we look at transport layer integration. By transport layer, I mean integration which is going through JSON request response patterns, right? Like a REST API type of connectivity. If you look at the Power Platform side of that, so meaning the Power Platform is taking care of the serialization, deserialization to JSON from JSON, then there is a disconnector for finance and operations. Really helpful for people who are not really good at, creating HTTPS calls or whatsoever using this generic connector. But for commerce, we don't have it, so that's our focus point for today. And then we also, if we look at transport layer for third parties, so not using the Power Platform, but third parties who like to do an HTTPS call directly, there is basically no open API Swagger documentation, available off the shelf for these finance operation endpoints, especially not the OData actions. And for commerce, we're also lacking that, right? So Microsoft have primarily focused on their native clients, primarily focused on the coding area, and less on the third parties who could also really, where we have a lot of use cases. For example, calling or utilizing these commerce APIs. Imagine e-com platforms like Hybris, Magento. These are third-party platforms. They also would like to do stock lookups against commerce APIs, for example. We don't have documentation ready for them, ready to consume these APIs, other than our programmatic side, right? Which is only one side of the story. If you look at where Microsoft are investing, then they are already now investing in a commerce connector. So there is now this commerce merchandising connector, which covers 3 of these endpoints. So out of the 400 that I just showed you, 3 are now kind of wrapped into a connector which is in public preview, and it's not really sure yet when it's going to be GA. But that's a first starting point, right? Today I will show you a way to kind of wrap all the available APIs into a ready-to-use connector. One other step up before we go into that second part. So if we combine these 2 worlds, the capabilities in terms of integrations and the 3 use cases, then this is a step up for the resolution that I will present to you to kind of cover these gaps here. So if you look at the first category, which is this open API Swagger stuff, right? And if you look then at your omnichannel experience, you could leverage Azure API management as your layer between your clients and the scale unit to kind of document that type of integration. At the same time, you could also do that for your third-party apps. They're just another subscriber, right, to that particular endpoint. Same applies for finance and operations. So we could position Azure API management as our developer documentation for third parties. Then if you look at the third use case, which is the Power Platform use case, you could also use Azure API management to publish a connector for the scale unit APIs. Right, because Azure API management, once you have your endpoints published there, you can export that API or those API definitions as a connector ready to use in Power Platform. And that's what I will show you today in the demos. So basically with APIM, we have our layer to cover all these gaps, that I just tried to schematize here. So I will do a little demo now to show you that setup. First, I will walk you through that APIM setup. Let me have a look at the time. We are now, I'm exactly 20 minutes on schedule, so Great on schedule so far. We'll look at APIM, then I will show you API definitions for finance and operations and for commerce. I will show you how you authenticate, and then I will run a postman call. So I have a few calls ready. I have written a blog post on my best practices on using APIM for these two categories of endpoints. I will have that in the references section later. Then after that one, I will show you the developer portal, where these API definitions are then published for third parties ready to consume. From there, you can then also export your open API standards, right? And if you do that, it's easier for the third parties to consume your endpoints. Basically, these definitions here on APIM, they will really 100% abstract your actual services in Dynamics and in Commerce. And you can even separate the way you authenticate to the Dynamics backend from the way these third parties authenticate to your Azure environment. And then last but not least, we will wrap it up and look at the pros and cons of this. So let me go into that APIM setup. Let me bring it up the screen here. So this is Azure API management. It's already starting from like 170 euro a month. There's even a developer edition, which is even cheaper. So and 170 euro a month could be already okay for going live. So it is rather cheap on Azure. Then here in the API section, you can start to kind of define your APIs. And we'll specifically have a look at customers here and commerce. So I collected some endpoints here in my customers section for the backend, finance and operations backend. And for commerce, these are a couple of commerce APIs that I plugged into this API definition. First of all, a little bit of understanding of what I'm going to show you. So it will be a tell, show, tell story. So if you have, and I will build this picture, right? If you have your client and you would basically integrate to the D365 Commerce or the D365 backend, right? It doesn't really matter which of either. Then you would always connect to OAuth standards, right? So probably you guys are familiar with that standard. It's just defining an application ID on Azure with a passphrase, and then you get a token and you pass the token. So this is normally OAuth 2.0, right? Basically app ID based. So that is the standard. You guys are probably familiar with that. What you can do with Azure API management in the first place is that you keep that Azure internal, right? So this communication here, I will not connect these two. Yes, and I will put APIM in the middle. So what you can do is you can define that type of authentication on APIM. You can even let APIM automatically rotate the token for access to the backend, so you keep that Azure internal. You can even put that in your key vault, right? So it's not accessible from the outside world. And then you can disconnect the way we authenticate to the backend. You can disconnect that from the client. So you can plug in any type of authentication here. For example, simple API key. Because some third parties may not be Microsoft standard familiar, right? So they want to have their own way of authenticating to Azure. That is one thing I will show. So the authentication side, I'll make that number one here. And then the second thing that I want to show is the way you abstract your actual services. So you guys all know that when I connect to the backend directly, I have to, for Dynamics backend F&O, I have to adhere to certain standards, right? I have to adhere to OData standards. But sometimes that's not what I want, right? Because if there are like 80 columns for an entity available, then anyone could filter by these 80 columns. Sometimes I don't want to allow that. I just want to only allow certain parameter values, right? So, for example, if you search for customer, you only want your third party to search by name or search by ID. So you could, with APIM, you can restrict that. So it's way more safe, right? Way more secure, because they cannot simply fire anything to your backend. They have to fire it via APIM, and they have to adhere to the parameters that you give them. So that's the thing. The second thing, abstraction. So let's take a moment and look through these two lenses to what I have configured here on Azure API Management. So if I go to my customers API, you can put policies, and policies restrict the use of parameters, or template parameters, or you can use policies for any type of thing, even retries. You can fetching that token automatically. So I put all of that on the main entry point here, the all operations per operation. So these are underlying operations like get customer addresses, get customer bank accounts, different operations for this customers API. But for all operations, I can define policies which apply for all these, right? So let's have a look. So what I did there, and I will make this a little bit larger here, so hopefully you can see it better. What I did here is in this section, I'm actually, first of all, trying to access the cache, right? So the local cache in APIM to find a token. So I'm actually trying to find the token which was stored previously for connectivity to the backend. If it's not there, or it's outdated, then I will fetch it. So it's auto rotated, right? Auto recycled. And I have a parameter sitting on APIM here, which actually says for how many seconds I'm actually keeping that token. So here in the if I expand this one, if I go to the named values here, you will find that parameter. So you can define that parameter here and then reference it as per your policies. So here's the caching duration is now only 30 seconds, right? You can also put it on a couple of minutes. So you don't bother your client having to recycle getting these tokens. You do it Azure internally, right? Because it's shielded off from the client. The client is actually connecting to APIM via API key. So I will show you where to define that. So if you go to customers, and then here you go to settings, then here you can tick that we need an API key as a piece of authentication. Of course, we can plug in a lot of things. I also had use cases where clients want to work with a certificate, or clients wanted to work with their own OAuth 2.0. So you can basically give them an app ID to authenticate against APIM, independent from how you authenticate to the backend. They won't even ever see that backend URL, right? So that's where I get into the abstraction type of thing. So if I look at what actual URL we are firing, then I will bring up my Postman here. We are actually firing a URL against this APIM instance, right? And then we kind of define our own namespace for this particular service. So the customer, the client, will never see our real URL to the Dynamics backend or to the Dynamics Commerce backend or the Commerce APIs. It will never know that URL. It will only fire a URL against API management. You will find that main URL, right? You find that if you go to overview here, and then here you'll see your gateway URL. So it's APIM, and then how you actually define it. So that is your main entry point when you fire a call to this one. So you have your main APIM URL here, and then basically your own namespace. So in this case, I had, for example, commerce customers create customer. That marries up with my definition here. So if I go to commerce, you will see that I can define my own, in the settings, my own kind of namespace. So what you're used to from the C# world applies here as well. So again, settings, you see that this is the main entry point, so /commerce. So it gives you that full URL, and then every operation has its own suffix for it. So now it's /customer / create customer. So that kind of formulates this full URL here. And now, since I'm working by API key and Azure is taking care of the authentication against the backend or commerce, I only have to pass, as you can see, an API key here. And that API key is connected to a subscription. So clients subscribe to an API, and then they get a key or some kind of other authentication mechanism. So you are actually connecting, as per this definition, you are connecting to commerce, but in a totally different way, right? It's a really, really simple way to connect, because you won't even see the actual commerce or actual Dynamics backend URL. So if I fire this one, I will fire it for the get commerce channels. It will fire it against APIM. APIM is forwarding to commerce. And as you can see, I get a response in this case with all the information from my channels, right? So these are all the Contoso channels in the Dynamics USRT company. It's even, I think it's a cross-company call in this case. So how does that marry up with my API definition? So I've got my commerce API here, and I got my get commerce channels here. And if you look at that particular operation, I forwarded that call, you see, to /get channels and then top 250. So that is my my retail server URL /commerce. That is something that I coded in a parameter, and then this is the suffix. So we are changing the URL, right? After the call, it's actually we kind of replace URL components, and then we formulate the URL, which is so the get request, which is going to the commerce APIs. So this APIM is basically that facade to do that transformation for you based on the policies that you plug in. So this is a policy that's sitting in the inbound processing, right? So we fire a call, we have inbound processing, and then our backend is basically giving us the response. So we could also plug in policies for outbound processing. I have an example where I also use that. For example, if I fire a call to the customer's backend, then it's always giving me a URL, right? You probably know it in the response. The first entry there is a URL which kind of represents the Dynamics backend URL, the OData backend URL. I don't want that, because I don't want my client to know that URL. So there's a policy to kind of trim it, to not being able to see that URL, right? So you keep it shielded off. That's way more secure for your clients. There's much more detail in my blog post, which I will refer to at the end of the presentation. But this is just an example on how you define that APIM definition, that API definition. Then a developer portal. So let's quickly go back to my browser and show you that one. So once you have that sitting, all these definitions sitting on APIM, it's basically automatically published to a developer portal, and that has a SharePoint style of modification. So you can easily go in, change any look and feel, put your branding in. It's like the web parts you're used to from SharePoint. And then when you go in, I will go back to the home screen. You will see the APIs which you as a third party have access to. So if I click on customers here, I will find the definitions that I just showed you in the APIM portal, but even more, right? Because this is giving you also response codes, potential response codes, what they look like, status codes which could be returned. You can define all of that on these APIs, right? If I go into this one, for example, I edit this, then here on the requests and responses, I can add these predefined responses. So for a third party, it's very easy to understand what type of response will be returned after the call. They can even click this API definition button and download that Open API definition. So that covers this gap, right? This gap that we identified. The only thing is you have to do the work, right, to get these definitions in APIM. As per my experience, once you have done it or set it for like 1 or 2 endpoints, then you can easily copy or duplicate those definitions out to other endpoints. So if you have your Postman call, your Postman request ready, kind of converting that into an APIM definition is in a matter of minutes. So it's not difficult to maintain it. Once you have done it, all of your third parties can easily connect, right? And the more information you give them here, the easier for them it will be to connect. So same story for your Commerce APIs. I will show some of them because we will see them when we are working on the Power Platform connector later. So for the get commerce channels, which I showed you via Postman, this is our URL. You won't even recognize your commerce URL anymore. I will make it a bit larger, right? It is a call to my main instance of APIM, and then the definition, basically the namespace that I defined as per the operation itself. So the suffix for commerce in general. So I can also categorize, classify the APIs in a fashion the way I want it, right? So in this case, you see that you have to pass the operating unit, which is standard for commerce. I can even put in my own description, operating unit representing the commerce channel, making the API call, etc. And then all the other information, including the response that the client can expect, and also the type, right? String, integer, so the type of variable that the client will receive. And again, you can download that definition. You can even try it, right? You can fire that call and get some information, get some response. You could also create a mockup, which can be helpful for integrations. While, for example, the backend isn't even up yet, right? We don't have a scale unit yet, but we also want our clients to kind of already start to consume it, right? So they can already develop their side of the interface. I do that very often. I use that principle very often in implementation. So both sides can develop autonomously, and then you bring it together in a system integration test later. I see some questions coming in, so I will have a look later, of course. I keep on going because we have a couple of other demos to cover. Now the one that you probably wanted to attend this session for, so the actual Commerce Power Platform connector. So if I go back to APIM, my APIM definition, on every API here, I can click the 3 dots and then I can say create Power Connector, right? So that works really well. It will then generate the Power Connector for you, and you will see it in your Power Platform definitions. For example, if I go here to Power Automate, you will find that one under your custom connectors, right? So if you export it like that, you will see it here. It's also very easy to update it. You can of course automate it, but the way to do it would be that you go into the API once you have done your updates. Of course, you can version that as well in the APIM. So you can create a version which is not live yet, a v2 or v3, which is then represented in the suffix of that URL. And then test by that v2, v3. That's particularly helpful in prod situations where you need to patch, right? But the way to update this is basically here to export. Then you export the Open API. It only supports the v2, so be careful. So if you export, choose the v2 option. And then there is a way, here to kind of update this connector, update from Open API file. And once that's done, you need to delete your connections and recreate your connections, and then it will be available for your current flows, for example. So once you have done it, I just simply converted my Commerce API here into that connector. Then it's available for creating flows here. So if I go to a new one, let's call it, test commerce connector. Manually trigger that one. New step. you will see that it's available in the custom, and then all the API operations, sorry, that I defined are now available here. For example, the get commerce channels. And it will ask me for the OUN, because in my definition, as you could see on the developer portal as well, right, that is a mandatory request header parameter, right? So if I go there, I create the flow, then I have to select this OUN. It automatically picks it from the definitions that I put in. So I have to select from the Contoso channels. So these actually really represent the channels in my environment. So I will quickly open the Contoso set and show you that. I have to log into another account here. So let me redo that again. Let me open this one. This one. And if I go to my online stores, you guys are probably familiar with these numbers. But you will see that 068, I'll put it side by side here, right, is available. So these are my online stores in the Dynamics Commerce backend. 070, 067, 068, that kind of stuff. That's what we can choose from here, right? Now, if I would run it, I get that same JSON response, right, that I got here. So if I rerun it here, it will also show me that the response. More interestingly is when you create something into Dynamics, right? For example, I want to create a customer. And you would say, yeah, I can create a customer via the Dynamics backend as well. Yeah, you can, of course. But when you do it via the Commerce APIs, you get a lot of logic for free, right? For example, when you create a customer, it automatically inherits the address book connection that you have on the channel via which you create the customer. And that kind of stuff. It copies VAT settings from your default customer for that online store. So you get something extra. If I hit create customer here, it asks me for first name, last name, that kind of stuff. Let's do it together. So here I will say, I'll put in my own name actually. So these are all by the APIM definitions. I'll make it number 3. I can also predefine my languages and my customer groups. They're all from Contoso here. And I put in credit limit in of 250 in this case. Of course, I can add more columns. In this case, I only wanted my client to pass in this information. There's much more to pass, right? But I didn't want to do that. Again, the same operating unit. I'm working on behalf of the 068, which is the Contoso online store. I save it and let you run it together. So now if we run that one, you'll see that it makes a connection via the connector. The connector is, of course, going through APIM, because that's our, that's where the API definition is based on. It succeeded, but let's really check if that's the case. So if I'm now going to my old customers here, it should show my name number 3. Let's have a look. There we go. So it's created with the credit limit 250. I put this deliberately on the screen because in the next demo, you guys will kind of fill out your own quiz, and then we'll see scores popping up here. So I keep this on the screen. And let's quickly go through to the next demo because I want to keep time for the Q&A. So this is our third and last demo utilizing this connector. So what I will do is I will shortly give you a QR code. You can scan that on your phone. Then when you fill out the quiz, it's 5 questions. That's passed on to Power Automate. We will also have a look at that Power Automate after the demo. I will pick up, the score from the quiz, and I will also add by some additional APIs. I will fire calls to retrieve how long it took for you to answer the questions. So you can get a high score when you give the right questions, but when it takes a lot of time, it will cost you some points, right? So it's also looking at how long it took for you to do it. That combined gives us a score. Then via API management, where we have our connector sitting, right? Our connector definition, it's passed on to the skill unit, then to the backend. There are not too many people in the call, but I hope all of you will fire this call. I will give you a couple of minutes, maybe 1 minute. And then we'll see the customers coming into Dynamics. So I will keep that on the screen and then we'll see who has the highest score, right? So let's go for it. Please scan this QR that will appear now. This one. And then let's see when it comes in. So I'll give you 1 minute. I will time it now. It's only 5 questions, so gives me the opportunity to drink something. I hope I'm not stressing you up, but we're on 40 seconds. I think I will give you half a minute more. Because people may be Googling for the answers. But it will cost you points, because then you're slower. So it's a balance between, you know, making some mistakes, some, you know, here and there, and being fast. Another 30 seconds. I think most of you have the QR code scanned now. Let's see if we already got some customers. Yeah, we've got some people here. I see Aurelian in the top 3. I see that Cruz was really fast. Yeah, unbelievable. You know, I'm not even in the top 5. You know? Ooh! Did somebody go in a second time and then answer them very, very fast? I don't know. But it looks like we have a couple of hits. Jan, it took some, you know, a bit more time for you. All right, let's have a look on how this was built, right? So I'm going into that flow and show you the definition. We have 1 minute left for this one, and then I will wrap up. So if you go to solutions, I built that flow there. We go to the Power Community Event Solution, and then from there I will open the Cloud Flow. So this is the one, and the one that you guys went through, just to show you that. Otherwise you don't believe me. You see a lot of people hit it. We'll go to edit. So when a new response is submitted, right, that's the trigger. I'm actually defining a variable for the time wait, right? So how important was the pace of your answering? And then, you know, I couldn't just use the normal connector for the forms one. I used some other connections as well to get the points, because they're not in that standard connector. Also the duration. And here's the call to Dynamics, right? This is utilizing the Power Platform connector for Dynamics that I just demoed. That's the last step. So I calculate the final points, and then I put that in the credit limit column. So I kind of use that column for these points. But you can imagine that you could convert this, for example, your consumers could do something similar like this. It's very playful, right? And then you could maybe convert that into some bonus loyalty points or something. That could all be done with this setup. So we're quickly going to wrap up because I see some questions. So let's move on to the last piece. So here you can find some resources. I have my own blog site. There are not too many blog posts on it, but I think the ones that I put on it are relevant for this session. So you will find how to handle commerce integrations and also how to use APIM for F&O and commerce integrations. What I find also very useful is this area from the tech talks, right? There's a specific area for the commerce ones. I find them very useful because they keep you up to date on the latest and greatest in terms of commerce, particularly on the technical side. And then my question to the community is, and maybe you can connect with me after the session or forward this to others. Could we start a GitHub repository building this commerce connector via APIM together, right? So we could potentially wrap all the 400 APIs into this APIM definition, right? And then create ARM templates to quickly deploy it, and then use that connector in Power Platform. So it's kind of open source. Everybody could use it, and it will, especially accelerate any third-party sales channel integration or app integration, whether it be Power Platform or third-party. So maybe you can bring this home, think about it, and connect with me afterwards on how to. Maybe there are some people who want to help setting up this repository. We have a fast track repository now. This could be a great addition, I think, for commerce. So it's time for Q&A. Let's have a look at the questions. Let's see. I will bring this up here. Let's see, it started here, I think. Yeah. Is it possible to link the same set of APIs to multiple environments? If you mean that it can be, it's very easy to repoint or relink one APIM instance. I think that's the beauty of APIM. And within APIM, yes, you can do that. So as I showed you earlier, every API, basically even every operation, can be repointed to another environment. So what I mean by that is, I'll show you that in the APIM instance. If you have your API definition here, I did a forwarding. I have to reload it. This sometimes happens on the portal. Yeah. So I'm actually forwarding this. You can see it here, but the prefix thing here, so the real environment, is not sitting here. It's sitting in a variable, and you can easily repoint by that variable. So that named value here, that is used in my policy, that named value for my environment, right? So let me have a look a little more. So I have a D365 Ops environment URL here. I have also a commerce environment URL here, and they are referenced in my policies. Right. So if I go to the policy, you will find that D365 Ops commerce environment, or if I go to the backend API, you will see the same pattern that I referenced the Dynamics environment. So on every API here, even I could overrule this, right? I could overrule this on operation level. I can link to a different environment. If I keep it static across, I can easily relink any client to another Dynamics environment via APIM. So your client could stay the same. It could be environment X and it stays environment X. But your backend side could be a different one just by flipping the parameter here. What I also build in here is that it stores the token by the environment name. So if you repoint, it won't find the token and will automatically refresh it for that new environment. I hope I now answered your question. Separate instances. Yes, you could, but not necessarily. Yeah, normally I think it's best practice to align it. I usually do it, especially also looking at resource requirements. Right, you don't want to overconsume Azure, so then your dev environment is backed by a dev APIM instance, so it's lower resource consumption, right? And then you're not. So if you have a very powerful environment covering your whole dev test ALM, right? Then you know it might be sitting there and consuming as your resource, you will have to pay this fixed amount, and it's maybe used for only 2%. That is a waste of money, right? Let's see. You have to create the same APIs multiple times. Not really, no. So you can create it one time, and then, of course, you can update it via ALM to a next environment. Of course, but you can also create a new version in your current environment. And if you want to use the API for different environments, you can use that variable to repoint it. You can even put the variable, if you want, in Azure Key Vault. When you have a non-Microsoft e-commerce site with high volume of sales transactions, will the Power Platform be able to process? Yeah, so normally when I connect with ecom, third-party ecom, I do that with Logic apps, but they can use the same connector, right? I have done that in a live case, and it was really great. I mean, I've never seen such a stable connection as the connection via APIM Logic app and then into Commerce. In my opinion, it's even much more stable than the backend APIs. So we went live with a customer. It's not really huge volume, but all the retail stores were on the same scale unit. So the retail stores and then the two ecom sites as well, all connecting via APIM. The stores, they were actually native AMPOS clients. So yeah, that's the usual volume, and it had an uptime. It's unbelievable. It had an uptime of 100% in a year. It never went down. It was never not performing. It was always fast. I've never seen that with any backend connectivity. So I was really positively impressed. If you use Power Automate, I don't know. I don't have experience pushing high volume through Power Automate. I think, yeah, for production high volume loads, I always use other Azure tools, right? Not the Power Automate side of things. APIM would connect directly to HQ Commerce. Yeah, so absolutely. So APIM is basically your intermediate layer, right? Your integration facade, as they call it. So yes, that would connect to your HQ Commerce, and the client is connecting to APIM. Let me see how we connect with client app. So multiple ways. You can do it programmatically via C# code using the proxies, for example. You can also use a transport layer, right? Via the Power Platform connector that I demonstrated today. You could easily create that yourself. Or you give that API definition to your third party, like with this open API file, and they could integrate that into their own development space, right? Their own toolbox, or they could use their own HTTP calls, to connect to APIM. So there are multiple ways. It depends on what the preferences of the third party. Let's see. I'm trying to use APIs via Postman to get a collection. Yeah, that's the whole problem, right? That we don't have that technical documentation. Yeah, so he ended up going into CPOS and then try to understand how the call was made. Yes. What I also usually do is I use the TypeScript proxy or the C# proxy. You intercept that traffic, right? Going to retail server. Which you can do on a dev box, so you don't necessarily have to go into CloudPOS and do all that stuff. You use the proxy and connect, intercept that traffic, and then yes, you have to kind of reverse engineer that yourself. That's not ideal. That's why I'm saying, as a community, we could build that repository together and then publish it on GitHub, right? Couple of more things for Shopify. Yeah, that's really going into detail. High volume of data, yeah. Look, I always recommend for high volume of data, I always recommend Service Bus, right? And then the queue, the messages if timing is not important, so it's not a synchronous scenario, asynchronous scenario, because you also have the dead letter queue, right? So if something goes wrong, you can publish it there, you can pick it up from there and then retry. You don't have to force the client to do it. Throttling, I'm not sure actually if they're doing it. We would have to ask Microsoft, but you know, again, as a consumer or from a consumer point of view, I've never seen any performance issues so far with the skill unit. So that's yeah, of course you should not exceed, but what I always do before go live is do a performance test, right? So we push real life volume through the skill unit to see how it performs. We give those metrics to Microsoft, and then they can help us scale even before we go live, and not based on an Excel spreadsheet, which most partners do, but on real hard evidence, right? So we do that for finance operations. We also do that for the cloud skill unit. I think I have to stop because we are 2 minutes over time. Sorry for that. So I'm handing back now.
Thank you, Patrick. So, Patrick, thank you for that masterclass on API management and connectors scenarios. And thank you very much for sharing your integration pattern. I think you've helped the community a lot there. I highly encourage you to get involved in Patrick's open source projects. Patrick, could you share the links to those open source projects in the chat so that the community can get involved with them?
Yeah, I haven't started that GitHub yet, so hopefully there are people in this crowd who can help me to set it up, because I'm not an expert there. So any help would be welcome.
Definitely. So please get involved with Patrick. Connect with him. Please share your connection details, Patrick, so that people can connect with you. That'd be fantastic. So it looks as though Patrick's, you know, I see a lot of potential here, Patrick. I'm not going to lie. There's going to be a lot of potential. So please get involved with Patrick's efforts. He's doing lots of great work there. Much appreciated. And again, big thanks, Patrick, for being able to make it today. You really address a very important aspect of the agenda. So huge kudos to you. Thank you for all your efforts and all your expertise today.
Thanks for your kind words, and yeah, have fun with the rest of the event, I would say.
Thank you so much. Hope to see you maybe in person at an in-person event maybe soon.
Would be great.